On January 2nd, 2023, while discussing leaks about a potential remake of Persona 3 with my friends, I said, a remade version of P3 done properly would easily be my favorite game of all time. On February 2nd, 2024, I played the newly released Persona 3 Reload, a properly done remake of Persona 3. It is not my favorite game of all time. It isn't the definitive perfect version of Persona 3 that I was dreaming of, nor the ambitious recreation of Persona 3 I was hoping for. I've always wanted to make a video about Persona 3 because it's a truly fascinating game that has an equally fascinating development, and with the release of Persona 3 Reload, it's taken one last interesting turn in both regards. Reload had me constantly griping while I was playing it, yet I completely forgave it for all its faults by the time it was over. So now that we've reached what will likely be the last chapter of the Persona 3 story, it's time to take a look at the first true Persona game, and the evolution it underwent during the 4 phases of its existence. In 1992, Atlus decided to revamp its Megami Tensei franchise into Shin Megami Tensei. Director-artist duo Koji Okada and Kazuma Kaneko would spend the next decade overseeing a laundry list of games under the Shin Megami Tensei banner, culminating in Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne in 2003. Nocturne was directed by relative newcomer to Atlus, Katsura Hashino. Hashino had previously worked as a designer on several Shin Megami Tensei games, and served as director on the Makken games, but Nocturne was by far the biggest project he had significant control over. After Nocturne's massive success, Hashino was put in charge of a new development division of Atlus, and given free rein to work with any SMT spin-off IP. Hashino chose the Persona series, a set of 3 games that had been gathering dust as part of Atlus's backlog since the completion of the Persona 2 duology in 2000. He tapped musician Shoji Meguro, who he had worked with on Nocturne to compose the music for the new game, and Kazuma Kaneko gave artist Shigenori Sojima a chance to grow as a developer by taking the position of art director on the project. The new development division, known as P Studio, took the basic concept of the early Persona games, modern Japanese teenagers summoning demons to fight literalized Jungian concepts, and expanded it into a cohesive mesh of life simulation and turn-based combat and dungeon exploration, where every system was built to reinforce a single thematic core. In 2006, Atlus published the result of their efforts, Persona 3. Persona 3 opens with the Latin phrases Memento Mori and Cogito ergo sum, remember you will die, and I think therefore I am. And that is in large part the thesis of the game. Life is finite, and it will end, but while you live, you are a thinking being whose decisions affect all those around you. You're put into the shoes of a 16-year-old who has just moved to a new city called Iwatodai to attend Gekkoukan High School. On the protagonist's journey from the train station to his new dorm, the world around him suddenly becomes tinged green, the streets become lined with coffins, and electronics lose their power. Upon arriving at the dorm, he's asked to sign a contract by a young boy named Pharos, promising that he will take full responsibility for all his actions. He's soon greeted by 2 other residents of the dorm, Yukari, who pulls a gun on him, and Mitsuru, who explains the gun is fake and for protection. A few nights after starting school, he's awoken by Yukari, who says they're in danger, hands him a sword, and drags him up to the roof where they're attacked by a goopy monster called a Shadow. Yukari gets knocked down by the Shadow, and her gun slides across to the protagonist, who picks it up, points it at his head, and fires. Instead of falling over dead, he summons an ethereal figure that fights at his side. He's later informed that this is his persona, Orpheus. A bigger Shadow eventually threatens to overrun them, but Orpheus is overridden by another much more sinister-looking persona that destroys the large Shadow with ease. After waking up from a week-long coma, the protagonist finally gets some long-overdue explanations. Yukari, Mitsuru, and a 3rd resident of the dorm, Akihiko, are part of a squad called Seize that fight shadows during the Dark Hour, an extra hour in between days where normal people become coffins and shadows come out of hiding. Shadows generally live in a big tower called Tartarus that only appears during the Dark Hour, but on full moons, a particularly powerful shadow appears outside Tartarus. They fight by using personas that they summon with fake guns called evokers, and they'd like the protagonist to join them. Naturally he agrees, and the plot proper kicks off. Seize spends several months fighting shadows, recruiting 2 new members in Junpei and Fuka, and eventually realize there's something they're missing about the Dark Hour. To remedy this, they take a trip to Mitsuru's summer mansion, where they talk to her father about the origin of shadows. Turns out, 10 years ago there was a big explosion after the company that Mitsuru's family runs performed a mysterious experiment involving shadows. Yukari's father, who worked for the company, left a message explaining that the experiment caused the Dark Hour to manifest, and to get rid of it they need to hunt down the shadows that appear on full moons. With a new goal in mind, Seize is joined by Aegis, a robotic weapon made to fight shadows, Ken, a literal child, Shinjiro, who used to be a part of Seize before some apparent tragedy made him walk away from the fight, and Koromaru, a dog. During their shadow hunts, they're periodically accosted by another group of Persona users called Strega, led by a man named Takaya. Takaya loves the Dark Hour because it gives them special power that they otherwise wouldn't have, and he thinks Seize is stupid to throw away something so useful. More shadows are defeated, and several major tragedies transpire, including the murders of Shinjiro, Mitsuru's father, and Junpei's girlfriend, and Seize being betrayed by their adult supervisor, Ikutsuki, and the message that Yukari's dad left ends up being a fabrication. Defeating the full moon shadows was the opposite of what he wanted, because it'll apparently cause the apocalypse if they manage to reunite in death. The death in which the shadows reunite ends up being a bit more literal than Seize expected. A cult led by Takaya pops up, and the indoctrinated populace of Iwatodai begins to eagerly await the end of the world in an event called the Fall. Each member of SEAS gradually overcomes their fear of death, decides as a collective to try to stop the fall, and eventually succeed by way of the protagonist's messianic sacrifice. The members of SEAS lose their memories of everything that happened during the Dark Hour, but regain them just in time to see the protagonist one last time as he drifts off into eternal sleep. Credits roll, Memories of You plays, and I cry. In 2007, Persona 3 Fest came out. It added some minor quality of life changes and introduced Aigis' social link, but the main draw was the addition of a new epilogue called The Answer to the main game now called The Journey. The Answer is bad. Very bad. It stars Aigis in a role she was not meant to fill, involves a time loop, and actively undermines the theme of the game by having the members of SEAS come into conflict over trying to resurrect the player character after his death at the end of the journey. The journey is about the acceptance of death and the inherent meaning of life, but the answer backtracks the characters into fearing death and trying to subvert the protagonist's sacrifice. They eventually come to the same conclusion as they did in the journey, but by reversing the stances of several of the characters, it weakens the resolve they previously showed in the face of death. Add on to that the time loop plot, and Aigis gaining the wildcard ability, and I have nothing but contempt for the answer. P Studio would go on to release Persona 4 in 2008, refining the new direction that the Persona series was taking. Then in 2009, they released Persona 3 Portable for the PSP. Persona 3 Portable downgrades the graphics by borrowing the style of a visual novel, and replaces the free exploration of the overworld with point-and-click controls to accommodate the comparatively lacking power of the PlayStation Portable. But what P3P lost in graphical fidelity, it more than gained in other areas. With another full game's worth of experience under their belt, the team that worked on Portable made more drastic quality of life changes, and added a fully new way to play the game via the female player character. Picking the female player character on startup results in largely the same story and events, but tweaked slightly in a bunch of places. Additionally, the female protagonist gets some minor rewrites to some social links, and several brand new social links as well. Overall, Portable makes a myriad of small but impactful changes that result in a stronger story at the expense of being less immersive to play. In 2012, P Studio released Persona 4 Golden, a remix of the original Persona 4 in the same way that Fest was a remix of 3, bad epilogue and all. In 2016, they released Persona 5, which got its own remix called Persona 5 Royal in 2019, and in 2024, 18 years after the original, a full, ground-up remake of Persona 3 came out called Persona 3 Reload. Persona 3 was P Studio's first attempt at the social link system, and its initial incarnation is understandably flawed. Reversing and breaking social links by being a bad friend is an interesting concept, but in practice, due to limited dialogue choices, it can feel arbitrary or annoying. There's the much maligned fact that advancing any social link with a girl around the player character's age automatically locks you into a romance with them, which, aside from the uncomfortable subtext that creates, also punishes the player for actively trying to pursue one of the incentivized gameplay features. And then there's the fact that some of the social links are just not great. Don't get me wrong, a lot of them, most of them even, are phenomenal, but a good chunk end up being duds for one reason or another. Kenji's is one of the biggest offenders, as it focuses on a student entering into a romantic relationship with one of his teachers. But instead of being played as properly manipulative and horrendous, the focus is on Kenji's happiness during the relationship and the heartbreak he goes through when they break up. It doesn't help that Kenji's is one of the first and most available social links for the player to pursue, meaning that the majority of players are going to experience it. Nozomi's social link has the potential to be interesting, but it clogs up what should be a story about a boy who was always compared unfavorably to his twin, only to lose said twin in an accident, with the whole gourmet king shtick. I find Chihiro, Bebe, and Tanaka annoying to be around, and Maya's mid-2000s gamer speech is incredibly grating now that we're 2 decades removed from it. But they aren't any worse than my least favorite social links in 4 or 5. The biggest issue with 3 social links aren't the ones that exist, but the ones that don't. None of the male party members, some of the most central people in the game, and ostensibly some of the protagonist's closest friends, have social links. That, along with several other major flaws, is remedied by the female player character route in Persona 3 Portable. Not only does each party member get a social link, but there are 2 completely new characters who get their own social links, and a few of the originals got slightly retooled for the better to fit the flipped gender. And all of them, with the exception of Ken's, which ends up feeling pretty gross, and Koromaru's, which is understandably light on story and character depth, are absolutely amazing. In fact, the female player character's version of the story is amazing in general. Her bright and bubbly personality fits the role of the soothing and altruistic messiah much better than the male player character's slightly detached aloofness. Because of the gender swap, she gets to see what the girls get up to while the guys are doing teenage boy things, which is an objective improvement. Being a girl makes Junpei's relationship to the player character even more effective, since her leadership and undeniable ability now also challenges his masculinity. Ryoji's obsession with the player being allowed to become romantic is also a plus for the female route, although it's only a win for her because the Persona series steadfastly refuses to allow for non-hetero relationships. And circling back to the social links, Junpei's, Shinji's, Sayori's, and Ryo's are all in my top 10 social links in the series, and they're all exclusive to the female route of Persona 3 Portable. But then in Reload, instead of adapting any of those amazing social links into the full game, we get these weak 4 or 5 times social encounters for the male party members and Ryoji that have to happen at very specific points in the story. Yes, I like Shinji's a lot, and yes, Koromaru's and Ken's are probably better conceptually than their portable social links. But that isn't good enough. Are they better than nothing? Honestly, I don't think so. By adding them, P Studios showed that they were willing to add content that was desperately needed to the male route, but by axing the full social links in favor of this half measure, all I'm left with is frustration over what should have been. And that's not even mentioning Sayori and Rio, who are limited to Blink Angel Missit cameos. The other major area of improvement in Reload is the presentation, which has been radically overhauled to match or exceed Persona 5 in nearly every area. Persona 3 was always slick, but that doesn't mean much when you're looking at a game that was made for hardware that's now 2 generations out of date. Anyone who started with Persona 5 is going to balk at the comparatively prehistoric attempts at style and the overall clunkiness of play that pervades 3 and 4. Nothing about the visuals or feel of 3 is strictly bad, but it's impossible not to see how it pales in comparison to its younger sibling. Some of the notable remedies that Reload makes to this include the extremely sleek UI, the text messages that alert the player to which social links are currently available, the visual upgrade of Tartarus, and the addition of damaging light and dark skills and baton pass, which has been renamed to Shift. Importantly, all of those have been tweaked to fit into Persona 3's pre-existing identity and aesthetic. But again, Reload makes a weird half measure here. Instead of just adding EXP share for characters who aren't in your active party, there's a room that opens semi-randomly that will allow up to 2 of your under-leveled party members to catch up to the main character. It seems like they don't want to disincentivize experimenting with different characters, but you can't even switch party members while exploring, let alone in battle, and the disparity in usefulness hasn't been remedied at all, so there's really no point to trying out characters you haven't been using other than to sate your curiosity. Even though every potential party member has unique voice lines, animations, and abilities, the median player will never see even half of them because you have to actively hamper your effectiveness to get the full experience. And again, it leaves me with the question of why make these half-baked additions to the original if said additions don't actually fix the issues they're a response to. Persona 3 Portable showed off all the knowledge and experience the team had gained from the release of Persona 4, but was held back by its platform. Persona 3 Reload gestures at the fact that the series has expanded and advanced with the release of 5, but doesn't fully commit to actually embracing all the improvements. But while playing Reload, I still felt all the same things I always feel when I play Persona 3. The third semester still gave me chills, and the modernization of the exploration, voice acting, and gameplay genuinely elevated the experience from excellent to superlative. I'm not sure Reload will be the version that I come back to when I crave Persona 3, but I am very glad it exists and that I got to play it. With the release of Persona 3 Reload, an era comes to an end. Katsura Hashino, Shigenori Sojima, and several other core P Studio staff left to work on new projects under the Studio Zero name, and Shoji Meguro left Atlus entirely to become a freelancer in 2021. There will be no more Persona games created under their direct influence. Obviously, the Persona series won't completely change just because some of the most influential developers aren't working on it anymore, and none of them have left the industry, just the franchise, so they'll still be making games. But it is an end, and I'm glad that end came with a remake of Persona 3, leaving us with one last memento mori. Remember, you will die. In time, all things come to the same end, but that doesn't mean what comes before is meaningless. Persona 3 makes the case that even though death is inevitable, every life makes a tangible impact on those we're connected to, and that holds true for art as well. The Persona trilogy is over, but it radically affected my life, and I cherish the time I've spent engaged with its story and characters. It doesn't matter that I'll never have my perfect version of Persona 3, because the 4 iterations that I've played have already made the perfect impact on my life.